It is the fourth watch, the time when night begins to loosen its grip, but the day has not yet dared to arrive. A time that belongs to no one and nothing, not to the stars, not to the sun, not even to the gods. I am awake, as I often am, while the camp still slumbers. My blanket, though woolen and thick, feels thin against the northern chill. Gaul's cold is not sharp like a blade. It is slow and thorough, creeping in through every seam, every fold, until it settles deep into the bone. I sit near the edge of the camp, where the trees begin again. We do not cut too deeply into the forest. We have learned not to provoke what we don't understand. The Gauls say their woods are sacred, and sometimes, when the wind moves just right, I almost believe them. My breath hangs in front of me in short, fading clouds, catching the moonlight in the still air. Around me, my brothers sleep in bundles of wool and leather, scattered like driftwood on the shore of some great invisible sea. The fire has died down to its glowing heart, the embers pulsing like a quiet heartbeat. Cassius stirs in his sleep. He talks sometimes, whimpers really. I wonder what his mother's kitchen looked like. He speaks of it often, with a kind of reverence. He once said the scent of rosemary on his mother's fingers meant he was safe. I do not remember the smell of my mother's hands, only the rhythm of her voice when she sang while she worked. I hum it now, quietly, letting the melody slip between my teeth like smoke. The sky above is vast, impossibly clear. I have never seen so many stars. In Rome the light chokes them, but here they spill across the heavens with arrogance. Gaul's sky is not subtle. It is a great black ocean turned upside down, and each star is a lantern floating over unknowable depths. I try to trace the constellations I once memorized as a boy. Orion, yes, faint and low to the south. But the rest have shifted, like the Gauls themselves, similar enough to seem familiar, different enough to unsettle. There are stars here the scholars never named, stars the Druids perhaps whispered about, stars that don't care what men call them. The first time I noticed them, I was on night watch. An older centurion leaned beside me, arms crossed, and said, "You see those 3 stars? That's how I find north. Not the pole star, the crooked one next to it. That's mine." He winked. Everyone has their own map if they look long enough. I suppose I've begun to build my own now. That crooked star he pointed to, I named Flavia. She would have laughed, said it was too small, too dim. But she'd have smiled when she said it. Her smile was never for show. My fingers flex, stiff from the cold. I rub them together and press them against the inside of my cloak. The wool is scratchy, but it's real. Sometimes, in the deeper hours of night, reality feels like a thing you must cling to, like rope over a ravine. I hear a noise from the trees, a low rustle, distant but deliberate. Not an animal, I think, not a large one at least. Maybe just the wind. The forest here is never truly still. It speaks in a language older than Latin, older than war. The Gauls say spirits live among the roots, in the hollows of trees, watching us as we sleep. We pretend not to believe them, but none of us stray too far from camp. The air tastes of damp wood and cooling ash. I close my eyes and breathe deeply. When I open them, the stars seem closer. Marcus, a few bedrolls away, shifts in his sleep. His hand twitches toward the hilt of his sword. Even unconscious, the habits remain. He told me once that he dreams of battles that never happened,
Fights where he can't lift his arms, or where the enemy has his brother's face. I told him to stop eating so much garlic. He laughed, but only with his mouth. I look to the mountains again. They remain stoic, carved by time and crowned by snow.
We are strangers here, visitors tolerated, not welcomed. Our tents, our roads, our discipline, none of it means anything to the trees, to the hills, to the stars. And yet we remain. There's a comfort in that, oddly, to know you are small, to feel it, not in shame, but in acceptance. Perhaps the stars do not shine for us. Perhaps they shine because that is what they were made to do, and we are merely lucky to witness it. The first light begins to flirt with the edges of the sky, a soft gray blooming like ink in water. No color yet, just the suggestion of change. Dawn arrives shyly in these parts, as if afraid to disturb whatever ancient slumber lies in the soil. The fire beside me crackles faintly, as if in agreement. I lean forward, coaxing it gently with a twig. It flares for a moment, illuminating the faces of those still asleep. For an instant, I see them not as soldiers, but as boys, as farmers. Lucius emerges from his tent, wrapped in a bearskin. He nods at me and begins tending the main fire. He always wakes first. No one tells him to. He simply does. He adds resin, and soon the scent of pine drifts through the camp. It's a kind of alarm clock for us, softer than a horn, but no less effective. The smell means another night is behind us. Another morning, granted. I rise slowly, joints protesting. I stretch quietly, respectfully. This is not yet the time for noise. I nod toward Flavia's star, still faintly visible, and whisper, "Thank you." Around me, others begin to stir. Someone sneezes, another groans. Life resumes. But for a brief moment, in the space between dreams and orders, we are simply men beneath an ancient sky, watching stars that don't know our names. The fire speaks more than we do in the early hours. Its voice is fragmented, pops and hisses, sharp staccatos that echo against the canvas of our tents. Some say the fire has moods. I believe it. Today it crackles with curiosity, as if it's learning to understand our presence here. As if it too is a foreigner trying to pronounce a difficult word. We surround the flame slowly, each of us arriving in silence. There is no need for speech yet. Words weigh more in the morning, as if they too must thaw before they can move freely. Lucius feeds the fire with small branches of spruce, and the scent blooms quickly, bright, green, a little sweet. For a few breaths, it's like being in a home we never lived in. We eat bread hardened by cold, dipped in broth from last night. It has congealed into something between food and memory. I chew slowly, letting it warm the back of my throat. Across from me, Antonius rubs his arms briskly and mutters about his boots. They froze again, he says it, like he's surprised, as though this place should have grown warmer by now out of politeness. Beyond the circle of firelight, the woods remain still. Not silent, never truly silent, but watchful. The Gauls call these woods sacred, not in the way we speak of temples or statues. Sacred here means alive, possessing awareness. I've felt it myself on certain nights, walking back alone from the latrines. A pressure on the skin, like being looked at by something without eyes. Yesterday we found strange symbols carved into bark near the edge of camp, spirals and animal heads deeply etched. Marcus wanted to burn the tree, just in case. Lucius shook his head and said quietly, "The tree didn't do it." We left it untouched, but since then we've built our fires larger. We Romans believe in order, straight roads, square camps, measurable stars. But here the land resists shape. Fires flicker oddly in Gaul, shadows stretch longer, sounds carry differently. Even our sleep feels strange, lighter, like a coin placed carefully on a ledge. A young auxilian named Tiber walks to the edge of the firelight and begins to whistle a tune. It's low, minor, with strange intervals. I've never heard it before. He says it's from his village near the Euxine Sea.
It sounds like a lullaby meant to soothe wolves, not children. The notes rise into the air and vanish somewhere above the treetops. I think of Rome, of the amphorae stacked in sunlit markets, of marble steps warm underfoot. I think of my brother, who used to sneak out at night to count ships in the harbor. He always believed stars and sails shared some secret logic. He would have loved it here, or hated it. Someone tosses another log onto the fire, and for a moment sparks leap up like startled birds. We all follow them with our eyes as they rise, fade, vanish. No one speaks. We don't need to. The moment is full. We are not in battle here, but we are not at peace either. It's a tension not born of fear, but of unfamiliarity. The kind that lives in your muscles after weeks of sleeping on uneven ground. The kind that turns a joke into silence halfway through a laugh. We build a second fire, smaller, at the far end of camp. It's for the gods, some say. For the forest spirits, others whisper. Officially, it's a backup in case the main one dies. But we place offerings near it, bits of bread, fruit when we have it, coins, too worn to spend. No one admits why, but the offerings remain. As I warm my hands, I watch the smoke curl upward. It twists, dances, then disappears. Like time, like names, like the things we lose to distance and duty. I wonder if the smoke will carry my thoughts somewhere meaningful, or if it will simply vanish into the night, unheard and unneeded. Antonius asks if we'll move north again soon. I shrug. Orders come slowly in winter. Messages freeze in saddlebags or arrive smeared by snow. For now, we stay. We watch the forest. We listen to the fire. We let the land breathe around us. Cassius joins us late. His face is still soft from sleep. He carries a small bone charm he found near the stream. It's carved with what looks like teeth marks, but arranged purposefully. He asks if it's cursed. Lucius says no, but adds, "Don't keep it under your pillow." We laugh quietly, because that is what fear sometimes sounds like. I poke at the coals with a stick. They pulse red and orange, like miniature suns buried in ash. I think of stars again. It's hard not to. Out here, fire and stars begin to feel like cousins, both flickering lights in a sea of cold. As dawn finally arrives, pale and reluctant, the fires grow brighter by contrast. We are still tired, still strangers, but we are warm for now. And the forest still watches. Combraser, A seguir, apresento a seção 3, mantendo o tom introspectivo, narrativo, em primeira pessoa, ambientação histórica imersiva e atenção aos elementos sensoriais, conforme estabelecido. The first watch is a strange duty, neither fully night nor yet morning, a bridge between the unknowable dark and the world we understand. I've stood it many times, in many places, but here in Gaul it feels more solemn, heavier, as if the land itself is waiting for something, an answer perhaps, to a question no one has spoken aloud. Tonight I stand alone. The camp has quieted. Only the distant murmur of shifting bodies and the soft clink of chainmail accompany me. The torchlight near the tents flickers lazily, casting tall, distorted shadows across the trampled snow. I adjust my cloak, pulling it tighter around my shoulders. The wind here has teeth, not sharp, but old and slow. The kind of cold that remembers your name. I lean on my pilum, more out of habit than need. The weight of it feels familiar, grounding. Around me, darkness stretches. Rolling hills and skeletal trees blending into one another, indistinguishable. The only clarity lies above. Stars scattered like spilled grain across velvet. Venus shines the brightest tonight, stubborn and serene. I fix my eyes on her. She is my anchor in the sky, a reminder that something endures beyond the temporary structures we build, camps, walls, reputations.
There's comfort in knowing that she shone just the same over Romulus, over Caesar, and even over my father, who never left the 7 hills, but believed he could name every star. And yet, even as I watch the heavens, my thoughts drift back to Rome. It's strange, the memories that visit during the first watch, not the grand ones, not triumphs or tragedies, just textures, the sound of sandals on mosaic tiles, the echo of water in the aqueducts, the weight of a coin passed between friends in a tavern too loud to think. I remember my sister's wedding, how she spilled wine on her tunic and laughed, covering her mouth like a child. I remember the way my mother used to sit near the window, pretending to read while she rated for letters. My last one was never sent. I start writing one now, in my mind. Dear Mother, the stars here are not Roman. They're older, colder, but just as bright. I sleep in shifts and dream in fragments. The bread is tough, the men are brave, and the silence is more eloquent than any senator. I miss the sound of your voice more than I expected. The words drift and scatter like ashes. I will never put them to parchment. A soft sound breaks my reverie, a cough, low and rasping. I turn, hand on the hilt of my gladius, but it's only Severus, relieving himself behind a tree. He doesn't see me. I don't speak. Some moments don't need acknowledgement. When he returns to his tent, I'm alone again, just me, the wind, and the weight of memory. My hands are cold. I hold them near the torch for warmth. The light is golden, comforting, and yet it cannot reach far. Just beyond its glow lies everything unknown. Gaul, its people, its gods, its future. We draw maps, build walls, write decrees, but none of it makes this land ours. Not really, not in the way that matters. The Druids speak of stars as souls, spirits of the old watching us from above.
I scoffed the first time I heard it, but lately I wonder, not about souls perhaps, but about watching.
There is something undeniably observant about the sky. Not judgmental, not kind, just aware. Once, during training, our commander told us that the stars were tools, that they existed to guide, to navigate, to conquer. But I don't think that's true. The stars don't care where we march. They don't care who wins. They simply are. And still we count them. Like children count sheep to sleep. Like soldiers count days until the next march. Like the lonely count the things they've lost. I count them now. 1, 2, 5, 8. I get to 30 before I lose track. My eyes blur, not from fatigue, but from something deeper. A longing I can't name. Maybe I don't want to. Behind me, someone snores, a comforting, rhythmic sound. Life continues, even out here, even at the edge of the empire. We eat, we laugh, we argue, we stand watch. And sometimes, when the stars are especially bright, we remember we are human before we are soldiers. A gust of wind blows across the hilltop. It smells of pine and smoke and something I can't identify. A scent not of home, but of here. I breathe it in deeply. Venus is lower now, beginning her descent. Soon the sky will pale and the fires will crackle louder. Soon Lucius will rise and pretend not to notice that I stayed longer at my post than ordered. He'll say nothing. He'll hand me a cup of something hot, and I will pretend it isn't the best part of my day. But for now, the watch is mine. I close my eyes for a heartbeat, then open them again. The stars haven't moved, only I have. Perfeitamente. Abaixo segue a 64, respeitando o limite aproximado de 1200 palavras, con narrativa en primera persona, ton hipnotico e contemplativo, rica en dettagli sensoriali e introspettivi, conforme o estilo establecido. I first learned to count stars not as a poet, but as a soldier. It was Gnaeus, old, scarred, and missing 3 fingers on his left hand, who taught me. Not in a formal way. Gnaeus didn't teach with words. He instructed through gestures, through glances, through the careful way he moved, as if every step had weight. On our 3rd night beyond the Rubicon, he pointed at the heavens while we rested and said, "Up there is the only terrain no enemy has ever claimed." We thought he was being poetic, but Gnaeus wasn't interested in metaphors. He meant it literally. To him, the night sky was a tool, measurable, mappable, dependable. He saw it not as wonder, but as structure, a system. And so he taught us to divide it, quadrants, landmarks, patterns. If you can read a sky, he'd say, you can never be truly lost. I remember sitting beside him near the edge of camp, a warm rock at my back, and watching him outline invisible shapes in the air. "That one," he said, pointing to a rough triangle of stars, "I call the boar's tusk. You'll only see it from this far north. If it shifts too far left, the weather changes. Snow's coming. Trust the tusk." We laughed, but then it snowed. Every time. After that, I began keeping a private tally, not just of stars, but of what they seemed to predict.
When the tusk drifted, the cold worsened. When the small cluster near the eastern ridge brightened, there was always fog. When Venus vanished early, someone usually died. Superstition? Maybe. But out here, surrounded by woods that whisper and men who dream of home with tears in their beards, a little pattern feels like safety. There's something sacred in repetition, a ritual of looking up and finding the same lights where you left them. The rest of the world may shift, but the sky, even when it lies, does so consistently. Gnaeus had names for stars that didn't match the official ones. He said the ones in the scrolls were for scholars. Ours were for surviving. We named them after comrades, mistakes, places we missed. There was one I called Portgate, because it sat just above where the moon rose on the night I last saw Rome's western gate.
Another I named Felix, after the man who taught me how to laugh during forced marches. He died during a river crossing, swept away before I could shout his name. The star is still there. It hasn't moved. It became a habit. When words ran dry or the fire burned low, we'd look up and assign meaning to light. Sometimes I wonder if that's all belief is, assigning stories to things that don't speak. On the clearest nights, I could chart 10 constellations, maybe more. Some mirrored the ones in our records. Others were strange, shifting, uniquely Gaelic. One of them, formed by 5 faint pinpricks low on the horizon, we called the Archer's Doubt. Gnaeus said it looked like a man who had drawn his bow but had forgotten why. It made us laugh. It also made us quiet. There's a comfort in that ambiguity. The sky isn't ours. We look up and try to possess it, to name it, to cut it into pieces. But it remains whole, indifferent. And still we count. Tonight I lie on my back near the perimeter trench. The earth is cold but dry. The stars above are sharp, almost metallic. A thin frost covers the grass beside me, glizzering faintly. It crackles if I move too quickly, so I stay still. I begin counting. 1, 2, 3. The boar's tusk. The Archer's Doubt. Felix. The river path. The lost camp. Each one holds something, a memory, a meaning, a way of surviving a night that might otherwise swallow you. I remember Gnaeus again. His voice was deep like crushed gravel, but soft when he spoke of the sky. He never married, never wrote letters. I asked him once if he missed anything. He looked up, squinted, and said, "Sometimes I dream that the stars are torches, and I'm walking home by their light. But the path is too long, and they always go out before I reach the door." He died quietly, in his sleep, during a frost heavier than this one. We buried him with his gladius, his boots, and a piece of charcoal he used to draw star maps on the inside of his tent. I took that charcoal and drew one last map on the nearest tree, his stars all in place. I don't know if it lasted, but I see them now, still where he left them. Some of the new recruits don't understand why we stargaze. They call it old legion tricks. They think war is all forward motion, that the only important direction is ahead. They don't yet know that sometimes survival means knowing where not to step, which hill to wait behind, when to be still, and what the sky is trying to whisper before the first spear flies. Out here, time isn't measured in hours, but in repetitions. How many times you've seen the moon rise without hearing news? How many nights you've counted stars instead of sheep? How many breaths you've held, waiting for the howls to come from the forest. How many constellations have faded with the fog and returned as if nothing had changed. The fire behind me crackles. Someone coughs. I do not turn around. I stay with the sky. Venus has returned, low and bright. Gnaeus called her the morning's oldest promise. She doesn't look like a goddess. She looks like a signal fire, burning far across an unknown sea. A reminder that something, somewhere, still watches back. The stars are not ours, but still we count them. Because in their cold silence they give shape to the things we can't speak aloud. And in naming them, maybe we name parts of ourselves we didn't know were waiting. Com prazer. Abaixo segue a seção 5, mantendo o mesmo padrão da estrutura otimizada. Narrativa sensorial, tom melancólico contemplativo e cerca de 1.200 palavras. We were taught that Rome had conquered the known world, that all lands now knelt to our calendars, our gods, our geometry. But up here, under this vast Gallic sky, I realize how small our knowledge truly is. The stars above do not belong to Rome. They are not part of our charts. They follow no path inscribed on scrolls in dusty libraries. They form shapes that none of our philosophers ever named. Tonight, the fire burns low, casting soft orange shadows across the snow-speckled grass. I lay a little away from the others, my back resting against a pile of folded tunics, my eyes fixed upward. The night is cloudless, and the stars are loud in their silence. Cassius lies beside me, staring up as well, his hands crossed behind his head. "That one looks like a serpent," he says, pointing toward a long, curving chain of stars that snakes across the northeast sky. "Not a Roman one," I murmur. He chuckles. "No, not like the Hydra. This one's thinner, meaner, wild." I nod. The constellations here feel different, as if the land itself shaped them, not with logic, but with feeling. There's one in the far west that I've never seen before. A series of 5 bright stars in a jagged arc, like a jaw with broken teeth. I see it every night just above the tree line. I've started calling it the Laughing Wolf. It doesn't feel Roman or even human. It feels like something the forest would believe in. And maybe that's the difference. Our stars are orderly, soldiers in formation. Theirs are stories, animals, spirits. Every shape in the sky here feels alive. Dangerous, yes, but also real. Antonius joins us. He squats beside the dying fire and pokes at it with a stick, sending up a few weak sparks. "Counting stars again?" he says with a grin. "Trying to understand them," I reply. He sits cross-legged. "They don't want to be understood. That's their power." We fall into silence again, all 3 of us staring upward like men listening to a song in a language they almost remember. I wonder how the Gauls name their constellations, if their druids hold ceremonies under them, if they whisper stories to children by starlight, the way my mother whispered fables about Mars and Minerva. Once, during a patrol, we passed a Gallic village. The people were silent as we marched through, but I saw a young boy pointing to the sky, murmuring to his grandmother. He traced the air with his fingers, just like Gnaeus used to. The same gesture, different stars. Even our myths feel like foreigners here. The laughing wolf stares down at me again. I don't know what it means, but I know it means something. I start mapping them in my journal, sketching crude shapes with a bit of charcoal. I give them names, not Roman names, but names that fit how they feel. The cracked antler, the drowned drum, the wind's spine. I don't tell the others. It feels like a secret pact between me and the night. Cassius asks me why I bother. Because if I can give them names, I say, maybe I can stop being afraid of them. He doesn't laugh. He just nods and says, "Makes sense." There's another one I haven't figured out yet. A set of 3 stars, all equidistant, low to the east. They form a perfect triangle. Gnaeus would have liked that. He loved symmetry. But there's something unnerving about their stillness. I've started calling them the waiting ones. Every time I look at them, I feel like they're expecting something. Severus says he saw them move once, says he woke from sleep and watched them slowly tilt, like eyes turning. I told him it was just the wind in his head, but truthfully, I've felt it too. That sense that the stars aren't just there to be seen, they're also seeing. Not all the men believe this. Some are too grounded. Lucius says the stars are simply fire, far away. But I think that's what unnerves me most. If they are fire, then how can something so cold come from them? Tonight, the moon is absent, and the darkness feels deeper. The firewood is damp, so we've made only a small flame. Our silhouettes look like ancient shadows painted on the earth by forgotten gods. It's the kind of light that stretches time, where each breath feels like a minute, each heartbeat like a prayer. I lie back again and trace the wolf, then the antler, then the waiting ones.
Cassius murmurs, almost asleep. Do you think the Gauls feel safer under their stars? I answer slowly. Maybe. Or maybe they feel just as lost, but know how to listen better. The wind rustles through the pines, and something shifts in the underbrush. We freeze. The sound fades. Nothing emerges. The forest never sleeps. Antonius breaks the silence. When I was a boy, my father told me that when people die, they become stars. Cassius smiles with his eyes closed. Sounds like something a father would say. I think of Gnaeus, of Felix, of the dozens of names I never knew, whose bodies we buried with coin and whispered rites. Maybe that's what constellations really are. Not myths or maps, but cemeteries in the sky. Places to store our losses, our questions, our dreams. The fire is almost out now. Only embers remain. But the sky is brighter than ever. And none of the stars up there care whether we name them or not. Still, we do. We name them because the silence is too big otherwise. Because naming them makes them ours, even if only for a night. Even if they never remember. Com prazer, abaixo segue, respeitando a sessão 6, respeitando o limite aproximado de 1.200 palavras, mantendo a voz narrativa em primeira pessoa, tom poético contemplativo e uso rico de sensações e reflexões, como define a estrutura otimizada. There are nights when the forest hums. It's not a sound you can point to or even describe precisely. It's more like a feeling, a pressure that sits in the chest, a resonance in the ribs. Something ancient breathing behind the veil of leaves and bark. When the wind moves just right, it seems to say something, not in Latin, not in any tongue I know, but it says it anyway, and I hear it. We have been stationed here for weeks now, on the edge of a Gallic ridge lined with pines so tall they blur the moon. The locals avoid this part of the land. They say the trees belong to the Druids, and that even their gods tread lightly here. Superstition, some call it.
But every man in our unit lowers his voice at night, even the loud ones. I used to laugh at such things. In Rome, we were taught to see the world as stone and rule, cause, effect, command, result. But the longer I stand watch in this forest, the less sure I am that the world agrees with us. I remember the first time I felt it. I was walking perimeter early in the night, the torchlight flickering against the frost. It was quiet, but not empty. There was a heaviness in the air, as if something unseen had just stepped out of sight. A warmth, strangely enough, but not a kind one. The kind of warmth that watches from behind a door you didn't open. And then came the whisper. Not a voice, not a word, just a rush of wind that moved differently, low and circular, like it wrapped around my ears. My hair stood on end. I stopped walking. I remember whispering, "I hear you," without knowing why. Since then, I felt it often, always near the same patch of woods. There's a tree there, gnarled and blackened, as if burned from the inside. At its base lie smooth stones stacked in threes, always in threes. No one has touched them, not even Antonius, who carves his name into everything. Once Severus tried. He approached with his usual smirk and reached down to pick one up. The moment his fingers closed around the stone, a bird screamed overhead, sharp and sudden, and he dropped it as if it burned. He claimed later that it was coincidence, but he hasn't gone near it since. Lucius says the Druids live in the trees, that they never left, only learned to move like mist, like shadow, that they become the wind when they choose. I don't believe that, at least not entirely. But there's something in this land that resists being conquered. We build roads and posts, dig trenches and set fires, but none of it settles here. The earth holds our footprints only briefly, as if reluctant to remember us. Tonight, the whisper is back. It comes with the wind, slow and deliberate, brushing over the tents and sliding through the pine needles above, like fingers over a harp. The flames of the central fire lean toward it, dancing in rhythm with something none of us can see. Cassius says it reminds him of his grandmother's prayers, long, slow chants in Oscan before dawn. He says the sound makes his bones feel older. I understand. There's something buried in it that feels both before and after us. There's a soldier named Marius who no longer speaks after dark. He prays instead, quiet murmurs in a tongue I don't recognize. He says words have weight here, that the forest listens. One night I asked him what he prays for. He stared into the fire for a long time before answering. To be forgotten by the trees. At first I thought he meant it as a joke, but he said it too softly, too honestly. The Druids, we don't see them, but we feel them. Or perhaps we only feel what we imagine they left behind. Either way, it moves among us like a shadow that never quite matches our form.
I once saw shapes in the fog, tall, robed, unmoving, watching from beyond the tree line. When I blinked, they were gone, but the unease lingered. Maybe it was just mist, maybe not. I've begun leaving bits of bread at the edge of camp, not out of fear, at least not fear of violence, but fear of disrespect, of stepping where I shouldn't, of being remembered by the wrong spirits. There is a respect here I didn't expect to feel, a reverence even. I know how to fear war and hunger and loss, but this is different. This is the fear you feel when entering a temple whose god you do not know. Lucius says the Gauls believe stars are the eyes of the forest gods, that when they align in certain ways, the trees open and the spirits walk freely among the living. I can't say if it's true, but I've noticed strange things. Nights when all the dogs howl in the same direction.
Nights when the fire won't stay lit, no matter how much resin we burn. Nights when dreams bleed into waking like ink into cloth. Sometimes I dream of standing in the forest, utterly still, while figures pass around me, faceless and tall, speaking in tones deeper than thunder. I always wake before I understand what they're saying. Tonight, the wind carries that tone again. Not speech, but presence. It runs along the edge of camp like a finger trailing along the lip of a cup. I close my eyes and let it pass over my face. It smells faintly of sap and something older, like smoke from a fire long since burned out. I do not pray. I do not speak. I simply breathe. And for a moment, I do not feel like a soldier. I feel like soil, like stone, like something the wind might remember. The forest is quiet again now. The whisper has passed. But its echo stays somewhere just beneath the skin, humming like a note not yet resolved. I write letters I'll never send. Each night, after the fires dim and the conversations die down to soft hums and throat clearing, I reach for a small scrap of parchment hidden in my satchel. It's worn, creased at the corners, the ink smudged from where snow once melted through the flap of my pack. But still I write. With charcoal sometimes, with a dull quill when I'm lucky, and when neither is available, I write in my mind. Sentences carefully constructed and just as carefully erased. The letters are always to her, Flavia. I do not know where she is now. Perhaps remarried, perhaps across the sea, perhaps lost in her own way, tucked behind olive trees and sun-baked walls that no longer remember my name. But I write to her because in writing I remember myself. Not the soldier, not the watchman, not the marching form in someone else's war, but the boy who once tried to impress her with poems scrawled in the margins of his Latin exercises. Tonight, the stars are especially sharp, like they've been wetted by the wind. I sit on a flat stone just outside the cluster of tents. A few feet away, Severus snores like a mule. No one else is awake. My breath rises in short, pale plumes. The silence makes space for words. Flavia, I write, carefully, slowly. There's a constellation here that reminds me of your laugh. Not because it's beautiful, but because I can't name it and it still feels familiar. I pause, tap the tip of the charcoal against the edge of the parchment.
She had a laugh that bent sideways, like it didn't know where to land. It startled people. It startled me. It was the sound of something honest in a world already rehearsed. I write a little more. About the sky. About the food. About a fox I saw at dusk, thin, white, with eyes like dark coins. It stared at me and didn't run. I'm not sure if that made it brave or just tired. Then I fold the parchment in half and tuck it back into my satchel. Tomorrow I may burn it, or perhaps let the rain take it. Either way, it will vanish like all the others. There are over 20 such letters now, none sent. I do not write to be read. I write to remember how to speak softly. Antonius saw me once. He didn't say anything, just nodded and gave me a piece of dried fig from his pack. That was enough. Other men write home too, of course. They craft their words with care. Descriptions of weather, of supplies, of health. They ask about livestock, brothers, news of the Senate. I do not. My letters are not for reports. They are confessions whispered to parchment, an attempt to leave parts of myself in places where memory might grow roots. Lucius writes to his wife, long letters, practical ones. I saw one once, neatly written with margins and underlined names. He rereads them before sealing. His hands tremble slightly. It's the only time I've ever seen them do that. Cassius doesn't write. He says there's no one left. He watches me, though, when I do, not with envy, but with something older.
As if he's remembering what it felt like to have someone wait for his words. The fire crackles behind me, too far to warm, but close enough to hear. I pull my cloak tighter and look up again. Above me the sky feels like parchment too, black and unmarked, save for the dots of starlight like forgotten words. I imagine the gods writing letters in those stars, then crumpling them into galaxies when no one answers. There's a strange constellation rising tonight. I don't have a name for it yet. 4 stars in a crooked square, with a 5th off to the side. It looks incomplete, as if the rest of it fell behind the horizon. I think I'll call it the half-said thing. It reminds me of the last time I saw Flavia, of the way she almost reached for my hand, and then didn't, of the sentence I never finished as I boarded the ship, "If I return," and then the horn sounded. Some words aren't meant to end. A breeze picks up, bringing with it the smell of damp wool and pine smoke. My fingers ache from the cold, but I welcome it. The cold proves I'm still here. There's a small flat stone beside my foot. I pick it up and turn it over in my hand. It's smooth, round, comforting. I place it on top of the folded letter just to keep it from drifting away. Then I place the 2 inside my pack again, careful, like tucking in a child. I wonder what Flavia would say if she read any of them. Maybe nothing. Maybe she'd laugh that same sideways laugh and say, "You never did finish anything." But maybe, just maybe, she'd feel something stir in her chest. A memory not entirely welcome, but not unwelcome either. A warmth wrapped in frost. A letter that arrives long after the reason for it has gone. The camp is still now. The snores, the coughs, the shifting of boots, it all quieted as if the night exhaled. Even the fire has dimmed into a low orange pulse.
I lean back and let my shoulders rest against the earth. I let the stars press down gently. This is not home. But it's where my words live now, written into air, into charcoal, into eyes that may never see me again. Letters never sent, but never forgotten. We didn't know the sky could move like that. It began without warning, just after third watch. The stars were still in place, the frost still clung to our cloaks, and the pines stood like tall sentinels carved from darkness. I was walking the outer path near the supply tent when the light changed, not gradually, not gently, but as if the heavens had blinked. Then the colors came. At first, just a shimmer, a ripple, like moonlight reflected in a disturbed pool. But then the ripple widened and stretched and rose, green and violet streaks unfurling across the sky like some divine banner being drawn open by invisible hands. The stars didn't disappear. They watched through the veil, unchanged, silent. A few of us gathered, drawn out of our tents by the quiet wonder. No one spoke at first. We simply looked upward, mouths open, breath escaping as fog into the cold. Cassius asked, "Is it the gods?" Antonius didn't answer. Lucius crossed himself instinctively, forgetting which god he was addressing. I stepped forward, away from the firelight, until the only thing I could see was the trembling sky above. It moved like flame, but wider, smoother. It moved like thought, like grief, like the feeling right before you say something you know you'll regret. No one had ever told us about this. None of the maps, none of the campaign briefings, none of the old stories mentioned that in Gaul the sky sometimes opens like a wound and light pours through in colors no Roman painter would believe. It felt like standing at the edge of the world, or at the edge of a dream. You know it's not yours, but you've been invited in. Someone whispered that it was the northern fire spirits fighting. Another said it was the breath of a dying god. Severus muttered something about Mercury crossing paths with forgotten deities. Me? I thought of Flavia again. I thought of how she used to braid her hair without a mirror, fingers moving from memory. The auroras moved like that, fluid, purposeful, effortless. I began to feel very small, not in a frightened way, but in a clean way, as if the weight I carried each day, my armor, my rank, my regrets, had been gently lifted and replaced with quiet. Lucius eventually broke the silence. "It's just light," he said, his voice thin in the vastness, "particles in the sky." But even he sounded unsure, as if he didn't want to convince anyone, as if saying it made it more fragile. The colors began to shift, green to gold, violet to white. The lights pulsed slowly, like lungs drawing breath, like the sky itself was alive. No drums, no shouting, no commands, just the night, wide open, showing us something none of us knew we needed to see. Marius knelt aside the fire and prayed, not loudly, not like a soldier, like a child. And for once no one mocked him. I tried to count the strands of light, the waves, the folds, but they changed too quickly. I tried to name the colors, but they were not Roman. They didn't belong to pigments or parchments or poets. They belonged to something older, something that had never been written down. Cassius whispered, I feel like they can hear us." No one corrected him, because we all felt it. Not fear, not reverence, but recognition, like catching a glimpse of something that had been watching you long before you noticed, like being known without being judged. For a few minutes, or maybe hours, time lost its discipline. We were not soldiers, not sons of empire. We were simply eyes, bones, and breath, witnesses. And then, as suddenly as it began, the lights began to fade, not vanish, just drift away, like a curtain being drawn back across a stage. The stars reclaimed their dominance, steady and unmoved. The sky stilled. We stayed there longer than we needed to. No one gave an order. No one dared.
Eventually, men returned to their bedrolls, silent. There was no need for commentary. What we saw was not a spectacle. It was an encounter. I remained. I sat on the cold earth, arms wrapped around my knees, and watched the last of the auroras slip behind the ridge. I wondered if they would return. I wondered if they ever left. Perhaps they simply stepped behind something we couldn't see. Later, Cassius sat beside me. He didn't speak at first. Then he asked, "Do you think Rome will believe us?" I shook my head. It doesn't matter. Because some things aren't meant to be believed. They're meant to be felt, remembered, carried like a weightless stone in the pocket of your soul. Cassius sighed and leaned back. "I don't want to forget it." "You won't," I said, "even if you try." I think the sky gave us something that night. Not answers, not wisdom, but permission. Permission to feel awe without conquest, to witness without needing to understand. We Romans are good at naming, at mapping, at cataloging the world. But this was beyond the reach of ink. This was older than our myths, deeper than our language. It reminded me that even we, the chosen, the civilizers, the architects of law, are children under certain skies. I tucked the memory into my chest like a letter. No words, just the shape of it, the pulse of the color, the way the silence trembled with presence. Tomorrow we will march again. We will oil our swords and count our rations and trace lines in the dirt with disciplined boots. But tonight, something broke gently open. And through that opening, I glimpsed a world untouched by empire. A sky that refused to kneel. There is something about cold that creates honesty. Heat makes us restless. It drives us to move, to shout, to command. But cold strips everything back. Cold makes you hold still. It slows your voice and quiets your thoughts. And in that stillness, something strange happens between men. We speak without armor. We admit things that the sun would never let us say. Tonight, the frost is heavier than usual. It clings to our cloaks and eyebrows like a second skin, and the ground crunches faintly beneath every step. The fire burns low, but we huddle around it anyway. Cassius, Antonius, Lucius, and I, our knees almost touching, breath forming a quiet fog between us. None of us speak for a while. It's not silence from discomfort. It's the kind of quiet that feels full, as though words are unnecessary because what we feel is shared in the air around us. Cassius breaks it first. "I hated you when we first met," he says, staring into the coals. Lucius snorts.
Join the line. We laugh, not loudly, but genuinely, that kind of laugh that creaks like old wood, worn, familiar. Antonius throws a twig into the fire. I didn't hate you. I just assumed you wouldn't last the winter. Fair, Cassius replies. I almost didn't. I smile and stretch out my fingers toward the flame. They ache from the cold, even through wool. You used to sleep with your boots on, I say to Cassius. I still do. Out of habit, out of fear. He doesn't elaborate, and I don't ask him to. That's how we speak now, not in explanations, but in acknowledgments. The thing about friendship in the Legion is that it doesn't grow like it does at home. There, it happens over years, shared meals, neighborhood gossip, festivals, courtships. Here, it's different. It grows fast, like moss on wet stone. It takes root in necessity, not leisure, in silence, not chatter. I remember the first time I saw Lucius cry. It was after we lost Petronius. He didn't sob, he didn't weep. He just stared at Petronius's empty bedroll for a long time, and then walked behind the latrine trench and wiped his face against a pine trunk. When he returned, he didn't speak for 2 days. No one mentioned it, but we began to sit closer to him during meals. We left him the last piece of bread. We shared body heat on the coldest watch.
That's how mourning works here, not in ceremony, but in closeness. Antonius always makes extra stew now, even when rations are tight. He says it's for efficiency, but we all know it's because sharing hot food feels like building something human in the middle of a land that still doesn't want us here. Cassius gave me his last sprig of dried thyme 3 weeks ago, said it was too bitter for him. I knew it was the last piece of home he had, grown in a pot his mother kept near the window. I took it without thanking him, because he wouldn't have wanted thanks, just understanding. Friendship here is not declared, it's enacted. It lives in gestures, passing the warmer cloak to someone shivering, covering for someone who fell asleep during watch, pretending not to hear a name whispered in a dream. Sometimes, at night, I hear Antonius murmuring in his sleep. He speaks to someone named Corvus. I asked him once who that was. He said, "No one anymore." I nodded. Lucius sharpens everyone's knives before patrol, says it calms him. I know it's because his father was a smith, and the rhythm of the grindstone reminds him of home. Cassius polished my armor after I was wounded in the shoulder. He never said why, he just did. These small things become the glue, not heroics, not victories, just quiet acts of care, offered without expectation. Tonight we share a flask of something rough, Gallic, probably barley-based, fermented in a way that would make any Roman winemaker wince. But it warms our throats and slows our thoughts. We pass it hand to hand like a ritual. Cassius takes a sip, then holds the flask out to the stars. To those who won't see this sky. Lucius nods. And to those who can't forget it. I add softly, and to those who don't have a name for it yet. We drink in silence after that. The fire crackles. Frost settles over our boots. Somewhere, far off, an owl cries once, then again. Antonius stretches out on his side, his head resting on his folded arms. "You ever think we'll speak to each other like this back in Rome?" "No," Cassius says immediately. "Back home, we'll lie again." We nod. There's no bitterness in it, just recognition. War isn't only blood and tactics. It's the way it peels off layers, the way it scrapes away pretense until all that's left is breath and bone and memory. And from that, somehow, friendship forms. Not from admiration, not even from similarity, but from survival. From the knowledge that the man beside you has seen you frightened, cold, foolish, and still passes you the flask anyway. I lean back on my elbows and look up. The stars are dimmer tonight. The sky is overcast with a soft veil of cloud, but a few stubborn lights poke through. One of them, Felix's star, flickers faintly, still watching. I don't believe in gods the way I used to, but I believe in the things we keep alive by remembering them. A friend's face, a shared laugh, the feeling of frost on leather, the sound of someone whispering your name without needing to say anything else. Lucius nudges me with his boot. "Your turn," he says. "For what?" "For telling us something true." I think for a moment. Then I say, "I'm afraid that when I get back, I won't know how to talk to anyone who wasn't here." Cassius exhales through his nose. "You won't. Not really. But that's all right," Antonius adds, "because we'll still be here, somewhere, even if not with you." That's what friendship becomes out here. Not a bond of presence, but a pact of memory. A promise to remain in one another's stories, no matter what cities we end up in, no matter which stars shine above us. We sit in silence again, not because we've run out of things to say, but because we've already said the most important things. Tomorrow we'll fight again, march again, sleep again. But tonight, in the frost, we are simply men who survived enough to understand each other. On the eve of battle, we didn't sharpen blades or polish armor. We sat in a circle beneath the open sky, heads tilted upward, fingers pointing, not at hills or rivers or roads, but at stars. Some of the younger recruits asked why. They looked for maps, for strategies, for orders etched in wax. But men like Lucius and I knew better. The real map was above. Not because the stars would lead us to victory, not because they granted us divine favor, but because they reminded us who we were before the march, before the banners, before we forgot what it meant to be small. We'd been ordered north. Scouts reported a Gallic force hidden in the pines, unpredictable, nimble, unafraid to strike at night. Commanders sketched out routes by torchlight, consulting surveyors and triangulations. But I couldn't trust those lines. They looked too clean, too confident. So I looked up instead. The boar's tusk glowed faintly to the west. The waiting ones hung lower than usual. Felix's star blinked slowly near the horizon, as if unsure it belonged. That was the moment I realized we had no control. That we never did. And yet we still draw maps, not for certainty, but for courage. Antonius sat beside me, his fingers curled around a twig, drawing constellations in the dirt as if they were roads. "If the wolf is here," he said, "and the archer's doubt is there, then maybe our way lies between them." It made no sense militarily, but it made sense to us. We began to build a path, tracing a line of stars that arced across the night like a secret road only our memories could walk. We named each marker with the names of the fallen: Petronius, Gaius, Corvus. Each name became a guidepost, each star a witness. Lucius brought us a small piece of waxed leather and scratched the constellations into it with a dagger tip. He said it wasn't a map, it was a reminder. "Of what?" Cassius asked. Lucius stared at the stars. that we're not marching alone. I still carry that scrap of leather, folded, worn.
The stars barely visible now beneath layers of grime and time, but I can still feel their shape beneath my fingers. There's a superstition among the Gauls, one I overheard while trading for salt. They say the sky shifts before blood is spilled, that stars realign ever so slightly to witness the turning of fates, that they remember every name, even when we forget. That night I stared so long I began to see patterns that weren't there. Or maybe they were. Maybe all maps are illusions until we walk them. A slow wind drifted across the camp, cold and fragrant with pine. The fires burned low, helmets rested beside boots, words gave way to breath. The stars, above all, remained. I whispered to the sky, not a prayer exactly, just a simple truth. Remember us. Not because we were great, not because we were right, but because we were there. When dawn came, we marched. The frost crunched beneath our soles. The trees were still. The enemy waited somewhere in the mist, real and unspeaking. But I had the map in my mind. Every time I felt fear rise like smoke in my throat, I reached for the constellations I had memorized. The laughing wolf behind me, the drowned drum to the left, the river path straight ahead. I didn't need to see them. I knew they were there. The battle itself is blurred in memory. Shouts, iron, mud, blood that steamed in the morning chill. The way Cassius disappeared into the trees and didn't return for hours, his eyes wide and empty when he did. I remember Lucius dragging Antonius away from a fallen horse, yelling not in fear, but in anger, as if rage could undo the wound. But what I remember most was the sky. The clouds had parted, and above the chaos the map still shone. Felix's star, still steady, still watching. That night, after the wounded were tended and the dead counted, we didn't speak of tactics or losses. We sat again beneath the stars, each of us in silence, holding our own grief like a cup of something bitter and sacred.
Lucius handed me the leather scrap. The stars on it smudged, almost gone. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Because we had walked the map, and the stars had remembered us. I think now about the maps we leave behind, the ones that can't be rolled into scrolls or etched onto stone, the ones carved into the memory of breath and firelight, of friendship and frost. We won that day, or so the officers said, but victory feels smaller than I imagined. What stays with me is the image of the stars, unshaken by our struggle, unblinking. They watched us like parents too old to interfere, like gods too tired to decide. I wonder how many soldiers over centuries have looked up from unfamiliar ground and tried to make sense of it by naming stars. How many men have drawn maps they couldn't follow just to feel less lost. I still draw them sometimes, with my finger in the dirt, on a slate, in my mind before sleep. Not because I need direction, but because I need to remember that somewhere, above all of this, is a sky no empire can touch, a map we do not make, but that sometimes, kindly, makes us. At night, their absences weigh more than their presence ever did.
We count the missing like we count stars, not because we think we'll find them all, but because counting is how we keep from forgetting. Their bedrolls remain for a time, flattened, quiet, as if the bodies they once held might still return and slip back in without a sound. No one says it, but we all notice. The spaces grow colder faster where someone used to sleep. Cassius no longer speaks during morning roll. He just glances left, then right, as if confirming ghosts. Lucius sharpens fewer blades than before. Antonius double-checks rations, but skips one portion, always the same one, and pretends not to. Gnaeus, Petronius, Marius, names we once shouted across rivers and ridges are now whispered or held entirely in silence. And above us, the sky remains unchanged. That's the cruel thing.
The stars don't flinch when we do. They shine just the same over the living and the lost, indifferent to mourning. Still, I can't look at certain constellations without hearing laughter that no longer echoes, or seeing faces framed in torchlight that no longer burn. There's one star, faint, tucked beside the archer's doubt, that I now call Severus. He was the last to fall. It wasn't a heroic death, no final charge, no noble sacrifice. Just a wrong step, a hidden pit, the sickening sound of something breaking. I was closest. I ran to him, knelt, tried to do what I could. But I knew. His eyes didn't close, but they stopped seeing. I remember what he said, though. "It's cold," he whispered. I took off my cloak and wrapped it around him, even as his body stilled. "I know," I said, "but I'll stay until it warms." I stayed long after the warmth had left both of us. That night I stared at the sky until I couldn't tell which lights were stars and which were tears refusing to fall. And that one, dim, unsure, off to the side, I claimed it. For him. I whispered his name to it once, just to see if it flickered. It didn't, but I still call it Severus. The others have their stars too. Lucius watches one just above the ridge each night. He never said who it's for. He doesn't need to. There's a quiet ritual we've developed now. After dinner, when the fire has been reduced to its glowing core, we sit a little apart from each other. No stories, no boasts, just space enough to remember. Sometimes someone will trace a line in the dirt, a mark or name. By morning it's gone, erased by boots or wind, but we remember it was there. Antonius keeps a pouch of small stones, one for each man we've lost since arriving in Gaul. Smooth, unremarkable, pocket-warm. He doesn't tell us where he finds them, but once, when we broke camp, I saw him return to a grove and bury a handful beneath a pine. "Why bury them?" I asked. He shrugged.
"Because we have to leave something behind that knows them. The stars know them too. At least, I like to think they do. It helps, somehow, to believe that those we lose are still seen, that their names don't vanish entirely into smoke and soil, that they're absorbed into the sky, stored among the light. Cassius says that's foolish, that remembering is enough. But then I see him sitting alone, whispering to the air, fingers wrapped around the hilt of a sword that no longer sees use. And I know he believes it too, in his own way. I write fewer letters now, not because I have less to say, but because I no longer know who would understand. So I speak to the stars instead. They don't write back, but they listen without interruption. They hold brief the way the sea holds salt, quietly, without effort. There are nights when I imagine a great hall above the clouds filled with the ones we've lost. Not glorious, not triumphant, just gathered. Sitting, waiting, watching. A quiet army of echoes lighting the sky in their own way. And sometimes I think they talk about us. He still forgets his helmet, one says with a smirk. He finally learned how to make stew, another replies, proud. It's a foolish thought, but it warms me more than the fire. Grief is strange here. It doesn't come in waves. It comes in stillness, in the space after a joke falls flat because the one who'd laugh is no longer there, in the morning routine of counting fewer footsteps behind you, in the quiet knowing glance between two men who both remember the same scream in the woods. The forest doesn't mourn. The wind moves on. The earth accepts the fallen without question. Only we remember. Only we name. Tonight I sit beside the trench and stare upward. The sky is clear again. The boar's tusk, the wind spine, the laughing wolf, all in place, all unchanged. And there, just there, near the edge of my vision, is Severus. Not brighter than before, not more meaningful to the world,
but known to me, and that is enough. We are the keepers of the unnamed, the witnesses of those the scrolls will forget, the ones who draw their names into the stars because paper burns and empires fade. But the sky might remember, if we keep looking long enough. I no longer know what day it is. The cold has softened into a familiar hum, not sharp like before, just present, like a hand resting on your shoulder, neither welcome nor unwelcome. The fire is almost out, and no one moves to feed it. We simply let it dim, let it breathe. The camp is still. The trees barely shift. Even the night animals have paused. There is a hush here that feels deeper than silence, a hush that belongs not to this hour, but to some forgotten memory shared between earth and sky. I lie on my back, wrapped in cloak and shadow. The stars blur a little. I don't fight it. My body is here. My breath is slow. But my thoughts, they drift. I think of nothing in particular. A glint of bronze on the shoulder of a friend. The smell of damp wool. The way frost looks before the first footstep. I imagine the stars are closer now, dipping down quietly to watch us sleep. Not as judges, not as gods, just as old lights, curious and slow. Gaul sleeps beneath us, deep, rooted, vast, and we sleep upon it like children who don't yet understand where they are. And above all this, the universe sleeps too. Or maybe it watches, or maybe it forgets. I'm not sure it matters. Cassius murmurs in his sleep, one word, maybe a name, and then silence. Lucius exhales long and low, his hand resting over his chest. Antonius hasn't moved in an hour. None of us say good night. We never do. We fall asleep like dust,
settling on still water. Tonight, I dream of walking through fog, not toward anything, just walking. And above me, the stars rearrange themselves, not to guide, not to warn, but to remind me that I am small, and that small is enough. The night presses gently against my eyes.
My limbs feel far away. Somewhere a pine creaks. Somewhere the sky folds its arms. And I sleep. The stars are distant now, softer, slower, drifting like embers across a sky made of breath. You are no longer on the cold earth, no longer beneath trees, no longer beside fires that flicker and fade. You are floating, floating above forgotten roads, above the quiet murmur of sleeping men, above the sound of cloaks brushing against frost, and the soft clatter of armor resting in the dark. The sky unfolds. A quiet ocean of silver, pulses and soft winds that no longer ask questions. Here time moves like fog, stretching, folding, curling into the edges of thought. Let it take you. Let the memories of boots and maps dissolve. Let the names you once carried loosen from your hands. Feel the rhythm of your breath, slower now, deeper, a tide returning to shore. Above you, constellations blur into one another. The archer's doubt becomes the river path, becomes the waiting ones, becomes nothing at all. And that, too, is a kind of peace. The wind no longer whispers, it hums. The pine trees no longer stand, they sleep. The fire no longer burns, it dreams. Let your mind drift like smoke through the branches. Let your body soften into earth, into sky, into stars without names. No need to remember the march, no need to remember the battle. Only this, only now, only rest. Good night, traveler of time. May your dreams carry echoes of the voices we borrowed tonight, and may the morning find you rested, where your footprints fade gently into the infinite sand of memory.